And just record this. Fantastic. So, welcome everyone to today's session. I am Ben Lunn. To give us just a short introduction to myself, I don't want to spend too much time dwelling on me and get us into the actual fun and practical side of all of this. I am a composer by trade. I studied in Wales for my bachelor's. I lived in the Baltic in Vilnius for my master's, and then I went on to do my PhD in Scotland very recently. I'm myself a disabled person. I've known I'm disabled since the age of 4. And so as part of this, it's meant that one, I've been very consciously aware of that impact on my work as an artist. But it's also meant that because I was able to navigate a lot of a relatively traditional music education, I've been in the lucky position to be able to help others who have not been able to access any form of educational professional world because the barriers are simply too high. And so, because of this work, I became the associate composer with a wonderful Scottish charity called Drake Music Scotland, which was founded nearly 30 years ago with the sole purpose of, through technology, making music education accessible to disabled people. And so with them, I've then done a variety of different projects while also at the same time talking to organizations, talking to festivals about how they can go about and make things more accessible in the way they're working, but also sort of demystify a little bit around disability because disability in all forms is it's a very peculiar thing in the sense of we are very good at suggest having sort of concerns about it or feeling having particular stereotypes about it, but also at the same time we never really are that particularly malicious about it. It's always out of a place of sympathy that we then accidentally discriminate quite heavily because we sympathize a bit too much and sort of assume that people can't do things just because of the nature of what they have. And so, to start with this particular talk today, I wanted, before we sort of go on to the practical, what can we do with creative art? We have to get a good sense of where does the ethos come from? Because I think at the end of the day, as I presume many people in here are artists with your own various different artistic disciplines, and whoever's sort of watching this recording later, you will have your own discipline, which in and of itself means that the potential barriers or the ways you sort of navigate your practice around working with disabled collaborators or around disabled audiences will differ place to place because the nature of what you are doing has different things. As a great simple example, for a blind individual, music itself isn't necessarily inaccessible because obviously they can hear. Whereas for a painter, dealing with working with a blind artist creates this different kind of dynamic. And it's just simple things like that, which makes us have to sort of ponder it. So we need to, once we have the ethos, the rest we can sort of work out from there. So for a long time throughout human history, we have viewed disability in a variety of different ways. Firstly, when we go all the way back to very ancient parts of human history, where we sort of see the very first mentions of disabled people in literature, namely around the time of the Bible, it's always with sort of superstition because we see people that we can't understand what's happened to them. And so this blindness is one of those things that we just know it happens, or we're aware it happens, but have no idea how it happens. This may be divine intervention. This may be, oh, punishment for being sinful parents, all this other kind of nonsense. But it's aware that it's something completely different to what we are used to traditionally and what we see around ourselves in everyday life. We then sort of advance as we society moves forward, and the treatment of disabled people is a sort of a strange mixture of superstition because we can't explain it, but also at the same time because of say like the teachings of Christ and all this and lots of other religious leaders is about being caring, about being giving, looking after those who are less fortunate and so on. So there is always this need to look after disabled people. So they're always treated very charitably in various different ways. So yeah, it's a strange sort of contradiction where you're sort of slightly horrified, but you care for it at the same time, which once again shows just how weird humanity is that we're able to sort of have these really contradictory views in ourselves. But this is around this time where we get sort of the term handicap as a very simple thing, done a very curious sort of bit of history where for a large period of time, a lot of disabled people were because they weren't able to sort of work traditional jobs, they had to go out cap in hand and beg. And that's where that particular word comes from, which is also why a lot of disabled people, they don't particularly like it because of that history of just essentially being impoverished and begging and not actually being having a dignified life. We then fly forward a few hundred years more, and medical science starts advancing, which because of that, we're able to start making sense of why certain things happen. So, for example, we understand why blindness may happen because it may be sort of the connections between the eyes and the brain or something in the processing of the brains, all these other kinds of things. We can make sense of that. Same with deafness, we can understand the intricacies of what the ear is, and then we can go, this is why it's gone wrong. And then as a result of all of these different elements, you're able to then start thinking about how do you treat it? Are there ways to treat it? Are there ways to help accommodate individuals and so on? And so this is slightly make this, but it's always done with the assumption of something has to be cured, which is a very sort of key issue within in regards to this, because it's not necessarily to suggest that medical practitioners are coming from a malicious place, but the problem is when your whole ethos is about getting rid of something, can very easily lead to very extreme elements of this. And for example, the whole eugenics movement was out of this need to get rid of bad things out of humanity. And this wasn't just, say, a right-wing issue. This was an issue across the whole political movement where it's just out of this need to cure humanity of its ailments and so on. But around this same sort of time, because of other sort of elements that were happening, we were able to see an interesting parallel where, because of the care institutions that were there for disabled people, that methods of being able to help people were developing. So there is the Institute for Young Blind People, which is a wonderful historic sort of institution within France, which has been educating disabled and blind individuals for a very, very long time, to the point that it's sort of miles ahead of lots of other countries. But it's also through them that one, we got Braille as a whole system of writing. And this was thanks to Louis Braille, who was a student at the school, because had various different methods to try and teach individuals to read if they were blind. And a lot of it included like text, but everything was slightly embossed. But it was the exact same. So it's written language, but everything's embossed upwards, which in theory works quite nicely, but the only problem is if you are trying to feel the letter D, but you don't know what the letter D is visually, it's a very strange thing to feel, and you can eventually make sense of it, but it's quite a difficult and quite a long drawn out process to make sense of it. Whereas with Braille, it's this much simple dots, which was then able to be used to become sort of an excellent way for blind people to get an education and be able to learn. And it was through various different efforts that in these institutions that for a period of time in the 19th century, that it was considered that blind people were closer to the gods. They were closer to the spiritual realm because it was deemed that, for example, learning was based purely on sight and language. And so when you have individuals who can't see language, but they're able to learn language, they're able to develop, people thought, oh my goodness, they can't see the mortal realm. They are in the heavens and able to see what is happening there. And that's how they're able to learn. And ignoring the fact that there was lots of very skilled and very helpful tutors who were guiding them through these processes. So within the 20th century, development of the of the medical sort of model is getting better and better, and to this day it still continues to the point that a lot of minor ailments we're able to get to help treat, and sort of the extremities of it is changing. The kind of support we can give is getting more and more beneficial as well, or sort of more and more effective as well. So it then means that we're in positions where blind individuals have a variety of, say, different kind of canes to help them navigate around the world. Our ability to improve how assistance animals work is another example of how we've been able to make it possible for disabled people to be able to just live their lives more and more independently. And so we ended up in the situation where in the 1960s and 1970s, where observing the incredible work of the civil rights movement in, say, the US and Britain, and similarly the work of feminist movements across the world at the same time as well, that a lot of disabled people realized that they needed their own similar kind of movement, and they also needed their own viewpoints to be able to assess their circumstances. Because at the end of the day, feminism does very, very well is it's able to sort of depict and describe why women ended up in the position they're in. It wasn't out of some God made it so. It's because of various elements within society that pushed people into these positions. And then the way to cure societal bias is by changing society into different elements. Same with the black civil rights movements and the sort of black rights movements, where once again it was highlighting that because of the vast majority of people who had been stolen from Africa ended up in the US, their whole uh, connection to society was at an institutionally separate place, and they had to undo all of that to be able to move forward as a society. And so, with this, we ended up getting the development of what is referred to as the social model of disability. And sorry, I have a quick little drink. I've been at a summer school all week, and so just lots of shouting at people to get them in line and so on. So I've got very little voice. Um, so, the social model of disability, in its simplest terms, is the idea that your disability is defined by the society that you are within. And what this means is there are elements about sort of being disabled that actually is just a could potentially be seen as just not necessarily a quirk to sort of play it down, but essentially if society changed, certain elements of how we sort of see disability kind of disappear as a barrier, but more just as an element of you as a person. So, as a great example of this is if you have a person who uses a wheelchair to get around, if they wanted to work in a bank, there is nothing about them being a wheelchair user that means they can't work in the bank. However, if the bank in question, the only way in is via steps, they're not able to work there. And so obviously from the medical point of view of this issue would be, well, if they could just walk, they could work in the bank. Whereas obviously the social model approach would be, well, if we put the ramp on the building, they're able to go in and carry on and do the work. And this ultimately is the key element we need to think about with all of this, where it's not the barrier is not that the person is disabled. The barrier is things that we have constructed and put in the way of people. And so when it comes to art in and of itself, we have to then think about the the act of making art has elements of barriers because of the way we sort of view and discuss art and the way that we carry out practice in that kind of instance. So particularly coming for myself, coming from a musical approach, there's a lot of sort of elements with what we do that creates barriers which aren't necessarily needed, or sort of we sort of overlook the fact that they've created the barriers in and of themselves. So I'm going to sort of, with this now, sort of we want to sort of talking about ways we can sort of think about this in context. There's sort of two very big sort of contexts for us as creative people to think about when we're working. There's obviously if we are working in, say, an outreach or education setting, there's also thinking about working with people when we are talking as like collaborating as equals. The reason why I want to sort of simply separate these two out is obviously the tone, the delivery, what is kind of expected, all of these kind of things change accordingly. And it also means that what we can expect from the people we are working with will be slightly different as well. But it's also what we need to make sure is because a lot of arts organizations, be it festivals, be it museums, galleries, music ensembles, or whatever, they often put their access stuff into one big singular thing. And it's often 9 times out of 10, the slightly youth or outreach and education elements. And what is often forgotten is the disabled people needs to actually be treated as artists as well. And so this is where hopefully with this talk, people can sort of keep that in mind as well. So coming to outreach and education, when we think about potential barriers, we almost have to sort of think about the space and the way in which we are working. Everything we do could create a barrier in some form. And this is not necessarily because we are all very mean people and we all discriminate against disabled people. It's just the nature of what we are doing. So, for example, if we are in a space that a blind individual has never worked in, that needs to be navigated in some form because obviously you can't expect an individual who doesn't know the space around them to say go and find something that you need. So just as a very simple, just starting off, just the space you're working in. If you have a blind or blind individuals coming to an outreach scheme that you're working in, you do just need to sort of walk them around the space, get them to know where things are. So if you have say like a creative bit where you sort of have this bit in the center where you're all coming together, chatting about what you're doing. Everyone breaks out to go onto their tables, do whatever creative work they're doing. You need to help them know where that journey is. So you guys just taking them around bit by bit. You don't necessarily even have to take them by the arm or anything like that. You just walk with them and describe what is there. So as an example, you sort of just you meet them at the door, you come in the door and going, okay, so this is the main entrance we are walking through. It's a big open space. We're about to walk forward. There is nothing in the way. Just it gives us the walkway to the center. In the middle, around here, where we'll stop. This is the space where we will be to when we come together as a group to talk, and then keep walking around going. And on the outsides where we are now, these are the spaces where we'll then go into breakout rooms and all this other kind of stuff. What that simply does is just allows the individual to be able to have that context of where they are, which is just simply very important because at the end of the day, if you as an artist, imagine you are somewhere and you can't navigate where you are and you're being asked to do tasks, even if it's just sort of fun educational tasks, it's just very disorientating. So we just have to, so just getting that space as an initial one is very, very helpful. Beyond that, it's then when we're thinking about the outreach, depending on what kind of thing we're doing, we have to think about um, what visual elements have to be engaged with in the stuff we are doing. Because obviously, I have not done it today, but you'll often have like a PowerPoint which then says this is the task we're doing, or just to put down notes. Then say the kids or the adults in the room who are seeing the session have something to refer to throughout the process and all this other kind of stuff. And so a simple image description is really helpful. So, for example, for those who may need it, I am a beardy fellow with relatively short hair at this point. My t-shirt you can see is a black football shirt, which has a lovely little star and a badge on it. Then behind me you can see a white wall, and the frame of my bed is this is one of the few places I can sit and have my laptop at the same point. So it doesn't need to be in too much depth, but it just helps allow and give context. And so, for example, if you had another PowerPoint, you would then describe each slide as it happens. So, like the first, this slide has these bits. Everything I will say appears on these slides, but it then helps guide people through it and builds on from there. And then when we go from those kinds of elements, depending on the people, because this is another thing we always have to keep in mind as well, all forms of disability are on a spectrum of some form or other, mostly because how it embodies itself in different people, how much people are able to sort of support themselves or how independent they are. All these, just like all humans are varied, everything is varied. So you can't just assume what works for one works for all. And so in some instances, you maybe have an individual who might just need an assistant with them throughout the education process, or the outreach process, which of course you'd welcome them into the room. Or if it's one of you, or if it's yourself helping, you then just you go down, you sit with them, and you talk through and you help however you can. And with all of this stuff, it's like with any of the people you're working with in this education setting, you just keep chatting to them, or and like you would to any other individual, and then describe what you're doing. So if they say, "Oh, what colours are in, or what's in front of us," you can then say, "Ah, well, we've got paper in front of us. Just in front, there are some pens, or there's paint and all sorts of the kind of stuff. A variety of colours. What would you like, or can I get you anything?" Just helps, and it's not in a patronizing manner because obviously you don't want to sit down next to them going, we're going to do some painting, so I'm going to pass you this pen because this is what you want. Because we don't know what they want. At the end of the day, we are creative people. We have no idea what creative people want. Creative people are creative. They will make their own things as they go along. And you always have to keep that vision in place. And so we engage with it in that kind of manner. And beyond that, there's obviously then the questions of how do if say in an outreach setting you've got group work going on. So this is particularly common within music because obviously music is renowned for ensembles. We like making music together, we like playing together. And so there will be a potential barrier on how you do that. And because obviously with like I say with in performing, sometimes it's down to simple things of like, oh, just nice eye contact with another musician and start together. Whereas actually all if you simply did is just say count out loud and you start together, or allow the individual who is visually impaired or blind to lead, allows that grouping to all fit together, and it's done in a way that doesn't necessarily single them out, but just allows them to lead in this kind of education setting. Um, And so yeah, so it's with all of this, it is just leaning. I always like sort of saying this, sort of drifting into the curve a little bit because you just sort of help out the individual to carry out what they are doing without trying to be too hands-on. Because at the end of the day, it's lots of people, as you're all here, I can always presume you're all very well-meaning individuals. Because at the end of the day, if you didn't like disabled people, you wouldn't be here listening to this. But as we're well-meaning individuals, it's always sort of our empathetic urge to get hands on and help and go, you're in need. I will help you. Where actually sometimes they can just carry on. They are people who live their lives and so on. They can't escape it, and so they will be doing it. They are used to dealing with it day to day, and just you need to be on hand to help when and as they need it. And then if there are bits that need to be seen, you just need to make sure that you are describing it to them and describing it to them as you would describe it to everyone else. Because the one motto I want to sort of say and keep this and want you all to keep in mind if you ignore everything else I say within this talk is for something to be accessible, it has to keep the essence of the thing that it is. If you have dumbed it down or sort of simplified it or changed it so much that the actual essence of it is changed, it is no longer accessible, it is an alternative thing. So what this means is in an educational outreach setting, you need something where someone can learn at its core. If they are not in a position that they can learn and they can't be creative, that simply isn't access anymore. Okay. So the next bit is obviously as artists, we will be working together and building things together in various different forms. And the great thing when you're working with another artist is you get to hear insights and different kinds of views and so on of that individual. The main thing you want to make sure and remember again is if you're working with a fellow artist outside of an education setting, they are an artist. They have their creative practice, they have their way of doing. And so in this instance, you're not necessarily helping them to be creative because they know what they're doing. They wouldn't be an artist at this point if they didn't know they were creative. So it means that if the question is more is how the two of you interact. And this can be on really boring levels when we're sort of thinking about, there's this wonderful artist I want to work with. I'm going to send them an email. I will send them an email and then I include lots of pictures in my email because I want to show the work that I'm doing. However, when you send an email with pictures, if you don't have an image description or alt text on the image, it will not appear on their screen reader. So they cannot see what you have sent them. And then you have to then take ages describing what you've done. Whereas if you can just ensure that there is a alt text on the image, that helps. Similarly, you approach another artist you want to work with and go, oh, this is fantastic. I will send you my CV and bio. Here's a PDF. PDFs aren't good. They can't work with a screen reader. If you're wanting to do something that works with a screen reader, a rich text format, so RTF, is the kind of format you want to use. Similarly, if you use a Word doc, that works quite well as well, but obviously with an RTF, it means that there's always a thing to help ensure that images have descriptions and it is much more heavily text orientated. So it's another element to think about was often talking to a colleague called Marilyn Yeski, who's a wonderful composer from Tallinn. She was the first blind individual to go through the music academy, and her whole studies was essentially her telling the academy how to deal with her because they kept sending like homework in PDFs and like, I can't read this, send it in another format because I can't do my homework. So we've managed to get past the initial, we've introduced each other. We have made sure that they can actually see our work and engage with our work in whatever format it is. We're then going to go have a meeting somewhere. Then the question is you're going to somewhere, if you've gone to somewhere they're not familiar with, you then think about, oh, how do we navigate this? Well, if you've gone to a cafe to have a nice little chat as an introductory thing before you get into work, you don't necessarily need to take them to the cafe and guide them all around because at the end of the day, they're a grown up. They'll know how to navigate cafes at the best of times. And also, you're not necessarily doing the work there, so they don't necessarily need to know the ins and outs of the cafe you're in. Obviously, you need to take somewhere that is a bit more spacious just to avoid lots of sort of very narrow driving and whatever. But at the end of the day, they will know how to navigate it in that instance. And so you don't have to worry too much about sheltering them from the element of life. However, if you are going to take you've done this initial meeting, you're like, oh my goodness, we're going to make the greatest art together. So we have this space, we have this wonderful gallery. We'll be in a week, we'll be in residence here doing this project of ours. Um, so we can work together, do our bits, and create this wonderful project, this interdisciplinary kind of project. We don't know what it is yet, but it's going to be magic. At that point, you kind of need to start thinking about, well, do they know the space? Because at the end of the day, if you're working in a space for a very long time, you'd like to know where everything is. There's nothing worse than, like, say, sitting in a rehearsal room and you don't know where the stands are. Or if you're a painter sitting in a space and you're like, oh, I need a bit more paper, but the paper is somewhere else and you can't find it, or it's hidden behind a key somewhere. It just impacts your ability to do the work freely and independently. And so you need to just have just help them, guide them through. And once again, much like with the education setting, you maybe meet them the day before, or the day you start. You meet them. You then have a nice casual walk around and talk about the spaces that they are, what they can be used for, give them a context, allow them to just the time to get a feeling of it, and everything builds from there. Um, so yeah, so with all of these things, and then within well, essentially what ultimately separates the collaborating with an artist in comparison to education outreach is obviously in education outreach, your whole purpose is to educate and to let people do things they maybe don't do normally. Whereas with collaborating, you are trusting the artist to be an artist and a creative individual. And so all you really need to worry about with them is finding what works with them in the best context to make sure they can engage with your work. You're not there to patronizingly tell them, and this is how this works, and this is how this works. It's more going, look, if you need these are here. You treat them like any other colleague, because at the end of the day, you wouldn't expect, like, if you're a composer working with, say, a cellist, you wouldn't talk to the cellist in a way like you need to teach them to play the cello. You'd presume they know how their instrument works. You then just maybe give them advice and guidance on how to navigate elements in your piece that they maybe haven't done before. And it's all these kinds of things that we talk about access. People often think, oh, it's this very big and very complicated thing, when often it's just we're doing very normal things and just adapting things ever so slightly. And sort of as extra sort of general things as well. With each individual, the nature of their disability or the nature of blindness and visual impairment differs greatly across the board. Um, so, for example, some people just simply need images in larger text. And then you just put things in larger text, or you maybe just enlarge what you're working with. So if you're working with a score, you just make a bigger score. All these kinds of things, and then that helps in and of itself. For others, because of the nature of their sport, they maybe have a assistance animal there with them, and in that process, obviously within the law around sort of assistance animal changes from place to place, but in general, assistance animals are allowed everywhere and sort of ignore any sort of prohibition. Sorry, any sort of ruling that sort of stops dogs going into certain shops. So, for example, in Britain, if an individual comes into a place with an assistance animal, they are not allowed to be ignored or not allowed to be stopped from entering, because at the end of the day, it's part of their access to get into the space. So the dog is allowed, and it's the sort of exception to the rule around sort of dogs being allowed indoors. But what this then means practically is you do need to ensure that there will be some time for the dog to go outside, because at the end of the day, we all need glue breaks, and it's just the same for the assistance animal. And then with the assistance animal as well, the thing you always need to remember, very simply, is they are working. They are a working creature. And so with that, you cannot disturb them at all because they are doing their job. And this is something that a lot of people often get slightly wrong, because they see like, oh my goodness, it's a cute dog. He's been ever so helpful. And then they want to pet the dog, or they want to interact with the dog and distract it, where actually its whole job is to be there with the individual they are assigned to. And they just need to be there doing. Because they are very good individuals, they are well trained, they will sit when they need to just sit or lie down and relax while creative work is being done. But it's not, you'd be overstepping a boundary by interacting with them. Much like in the same way, you wouldn't take someone's Zimmer frame to go, oh my goodness, this is fun, and run off around the place. It's the same kind of process. Or you wouldn't take a walking stick out from an old man's hand to go, oh, I'm acting like an old man. Just very simple things like that. And so, yeah, so this is something to think about on these kind of fronts. And then Another element to think about and always consider, particularly if you are sharing digital things, or sort of maybe even just sort of you say, let's say we're in a space, you're working at other sides of this like lovely little art gallery, and you're pinging images over, or you're both sort of working from computers and other little elements. You will hear constantly a wonderful amount of chatter coming from a machine. Because if an individual is using a screen reader, and this, to be honest, still amazes me to this day, is the speed at which a lot of blind individuals use their screen reader is incredible because they obviously everything has been read out on a screen as it will go web page of da 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 menu, all these other and describe each element and then describe each text and then go start going through the actual body of text you need to see. And because it takes a long time to then just go, this is the website, blah 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 blah. On the top there is a menu which says but then title, and then start reading everything else. So they play it at like 5 times the speed and so on, and it is just bonkers. I'm going to quickly see if I can find um what's it? A piece by a colleague of mine called Sorka Pringle, because her piece for solo piano is just incredible because it plays around on the interaction with this. Um, yeah, so it plays around on the interaction with screen readers and so on. So I will just, it's got it there. Da, 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 share. There's that. And there's share sound. Da, da. Then the second movement.
It started out as a novelty, a handy tool for making community, a way of thinking, learning, dreaming, scheming, as I sat with those like me. Then one day, not exactly sure when, I recall a Saki remark. You're distracting everyone else. Muted, 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 disruption of the status quo. My inclusion caused confusion, always interrupting, never letting the flow of apathy persist. Then they came for my mobility aid. No dogs allowed. They claim too much mess, it would mean we'd have to clean. What I glean from that is, people aren't clean. She is quite sociable, they say, as they make eye contact with her and reach out to stroke her, poking fun at my ability to with responsibility. Always, 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 putting a lid on my voice. It's a nice voice, a distant echo reminds me. Declined, 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 too short, too blind. 30%. Speech off.
In that wonderful piece by Sorkin, not only do you get to see what the how sort of working with a screen reader is like, because suddenly it comes in the second movement, just comes out of nowhere, and but we then it is revealed what has been said. Because for us, we can't hear, or we're not trained to listening at that kind of speed. But also, I just thought it was a very nice thing to make sure we get to see how one access can be a creative tool as well, and within Soka's work in particular, it's just the way she's able to one talk about access in a way that is just very revealing about life, but also is able to highlight just how sort of those kind of barriers within in the art world, in the music world, makes it just trickier than it should be. Because at the end of the day, she just needs the screen reader to help get through. She needs the her assistance animal to navigate through things, but people accidentally act wrong, either by just saying things slightly as a, oh, that's it's distracting everyone without thinking with good intentions, but then it has that impact and so on. So, yes, I've been talking for about 40 minutes or so, and I've shared a little bit, and I'm very curious to sort of hear from everyone's thoughts now. So I'm just going to say thank you very much for listening, and I'll stop the recording. I'm very happy to answer any questions you may have.